Hey everyone. Well, welcome back to another one of our talks. Today we are with Susan Peters, the CEO of Unbound Now. And we just finished talking about Alice Hinckley. And some of you guys remember Alice. She was in our first issue, and she has been such a huge supporter of behind her brand. And it was about a few months ago, I think it was. She reached out to me and she was telling me all about Susan. And she was telling me about how amazing she is and the work that she does. And, after she and I talked a little bit, I had a chance to talk with Susan, and I'm so happy to have you here today because of the work that you do. And we're going to be talking a lot about that. But I think what you do, we see it on the news all day about human trafficking, but I love the fact that you're doing something about it. Your organization is. So I am so grateful that you're here today. Thank you.
Eve. Oh, thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we jump into everything you do, and just a side note, you all will see her in this current issue of our Behind Her Brand magazine as well. I would love, Susan, for you to tell us a little bit about who you are, just in general.
All right. So I live in Waco, Texas. Been here a long time. This is where we raised our family, married to Marty. This year will be 35 years. And we have 4 adult daughters and our first grandbaby on the way. And I grew up in the North Dallas area, came to Baylor University, and then we ended up staying here. And then I started our organization 11 years ago.
So tell me a little bit about your organization. What exactly is Unbound Now?
Well, I had the privilege of being on staff at my church many years ago, Antioch Community Church. We had missionaries all over the world, and I would travel to visit them. And no matter what country I went to, I was face to face with human trafficking, whether it was child soldiers in Uganda, brothels in India or Thailand. It was just everywhere. And so I was becoming so burdened about it that something more had to be done. So finally came back, and in 2012, I just said, I got to quit my church job. Someone can do that. We've got to have more leaders in this fight against human trafficking, and really thought we would do more international. But when we started researching domestically, young people being sold for sex right online in our own communities in the US, we knew we had to start right here.
So I know you mentioned that you're burdened with it, and it's a unique burden to have. So when you say you're seeing it, like, can you share a little bit more about what you were seeing? You knew that it was human trafficking, because one of the things that from what you see on the news and TV, it seems so hard to catch, or so hard to know that right there is human trafficking. So what was it about you? What was it about this topic that made you feel like I have to get involved in this?
I think just the criminally minded people were taking advantage
Mhm.
of vulnerable people, whether
Right.
that's in the US, and those are young kids that maybe their parents or a parent is incarcerated.
Mhm.
Maybe the other parent is trying to work a lot, or maybe there's drug addiction in the home. I mean, human trafficking or sex trafficking can happen to anyone. If they're online, they can be lured away, but there are more vulnerable populations where they don't have those protective systems in place.
Yeah.
And then internationally, it was the same. It was
Mhm.
someone luring someone in where they thought they were getting a legitimate job many times, and then they
Mhm.
were being tricked into forced labor or forced sex trade. And so just felt like someone needs to stand up for this. Someone needs to protect these vulnerable people. We need to educate people in the communities. They can see that this is happening. We need to educate law
Mhm.
enforcement and prosecutors so that they can work these cases better. And then we need places and people to serve them to help them get their life back. And that's really what compelled us to do Unbound Now.
So let me ask you, just for in case someone watches on the replay and they don't really understand human trafficking, because it seems to me that the definition of that has gotten broader and broader over the years. Can you tell us what is human trafficking at its basic?
That its bottom line basic definition of human trafficking is when someone manipulates, controls, or coerces another individual for their financial gain.
Mm.
So they are identifying a vulnerability in someone. They are luring them either through force, which we know that's like the
Right.
kidnapping, which doesn't happen very often, by the way, but it does happen, but not very often. I
Mhm.
mean, I've only had 2 cases of kidnapping in the
Mhm.
2,400 cases we've had.
Wow.
So that's not a primary way, but force, some kind of force. Fraud
Mhm.
is primarily what happens, and that's where someone is applying for a legitimate job. They think they're
Mhm.
gonna, be a nanny, or they're gonna be, some kind of position, and they find out that it's actually gonna exploit them and force them
Mhm.
to a job with no pay or sexual servitude or something like that. Coercion is mostly what we see in the US.
Hmm. Okay.
Coercion is where a young person's probably online. Can be
Mhm.
a boy, a girl, or a young woman, or even a young man. It could be boys that are gaming and they're just playing with someone, and then someone says, "Hey,
Mhm.
skip over to this game," and then they start introducing them to free games and sending them
Mhm.
money and asking them for inappropriate picture, and then
Okay.
seducing them away from their core values and can trick them into this. So that coercion, or a young
Yeah.
girl, many times will have someone who friends them and says, "I was looking at your pictures. You're so beautiful. You're so mature for your age.
Mhm.
Hey, come over to this site and let's talk." And they build this
Mhm.
relationship, and they coerce them into a romantic relationship and then trick them into sexual servitude, and start exploiting them. So that's mostly what
Mhm.
we see, is the coercion. And so as a community member, what we
Mhm.
can do is, when we see something that just doesn't add up, you go to the gas
Yeah.
station and you're like, "That girl looks like she's afraid, or she doesn't want to be there, or she doesn't look like she belongs to that person." Kind of
Okay.
look and pay attention. I mean, we had a young girl who was trying to get out of a big rig truck, and
Mhm.
a community member called them, police got there. This young girl would not tell them her name, would not tell them anything. They
Mhm.
called us, because I can go and I can say, "I'm from Unbound Now. I'm not law
Yeah.
enforcement. I'm not a probation officer. I'm not child protective services. We care
Right.
about people like you. What's your name? How old are you? Where are you
Yeah.
from?" We were able to identify her as a 15-year-old on the endangered runaway list.
Mhm.
But they're trained. Don't tell them, police, who you are, or definitely don't tell them you're
Yeah.
a minor. But that community member was like, "This doesn't look right." And so a lot
Mhm.
of times people's lives can be literally rescued, by someone in the community going into a hotel and just going, "That doesn't feel right. That doesn't look right." At
Mhm.
a restaurant, on the airline,
Yeah.
you hear about that sometimes, where they're like, "This doesn't look right." Call the authorities,
Yeah.
check it out, because awareness really can save lives.
So with you being around this as long as you have, I have to ask before I get into a little bit more about what your organization does. How do you stay? I guess I'm trying to go with the best word to say, because you're around so much of heaviness, and
Yeah.
you're seeing so much of people's pain and their hurt, and just even the thought of what the girls, or I know boys also go through it too, go through. How do you stay optimistic about doing the work that you do?
I get asked that quite often, and honestly, I'm as excited about the work we're doing, or even more excited now, 11 years later, because our teams are out there doing it. We
Mm.
we have figured out a reproducible model, so now we can exponentially grow offices that reach more lives. So
Yes.
our advocates are on 24/7. They respond when someone calls that hotline number, or a police do a recovery, or someone's identified in a hospital. Our
Mhm.
advocates are there within 30 minutes to 90 minutes with that victim on their recovery. And
Mm.
there's so much research now that if that safe adult person can engage in that person's life within 24, 72 hours of that recovery, they have such a good trajectory of getting their life back. And so what
Mm.
keeps me excited about the work is that our people are there, and
Yeah.
they're able to serve them. They're able to make sure they're safe, to get their immediate needs met, food, clothing, to get them connected to safe housing or resources that they need. They continue to
Mhm.
support them when they have to go to court or meet with, different agencies. And they have a companion, a friend, trauma
Yeah.
informed person that's going to help them navigate all those systems. That's what keeps me encouraged. And then, of course, now, this
Mhm.
many years later, we have survivors that are on our staff now. I've got
Oh,
one that
wow.
went through her bachelor's, her master's, and now is on staff with us
Yeah.
in Austin, Texas. And she was such a fighter. I mean, when you're in
Mhm.
trauma, it's not pretty
Yeah.
when you're in that stage. And she
Yeah.
had to was handcuffed and taken out of a safe house. I mean, she was still in that fight mode. But now she's on our staff and helping others. And there's several cases like that are so encouraging.
I think you don't ever hear a lot of those kind of stories of the people that actually survived it, and not just survived it, but they're doing different things with their lives now. So tell us a little bit, Susan, about the actual work that you do, and what services does Unbound Now offer to people?
Well, the primary thing that we do, we have 3 lines of effort. We do a lot of prevention,
Okay.
and that means that our teams are out in schools, they're at group homes, they're in juvenile detention centers, and they're presenting information that is so important, like the tactics of a trafficker, social media safety, sexting, because that can be coercion and things like that. And these are things that young people are dealing with. And so schools that haven't done assemblies in 5 years are inviting us in to come and present to their students because they are seeing this. And so the prevention is really important. The professional trainings, we partner with our law enforcement agencies, other service providers. We do medical trainings because we want frontline people to be able to identify those victims and survivors within their professions. And then the biggest thing we do is that what we call survivor services, and that's our advocates that I just mentioned, that we have a hotline in every community we serve. They can call us, or law enforcement or one of our partners call us, and we deploy immediately. And then we do case management for them. So that may be looking like taking them to a doctor, taking them to their counseling appointments, helping them get their identification back, connecting them back to get their education on board. Also within our victims survivor advocacy programs, we have a home for trafficked girls, and that's ages 12 through 17. And this is a 24-hour long-term residential place where they can really get that intensive care that they need. And then we also in North Texas have what we call a drop-in center. And this is not residential, so they can only stay there 24 or 48 hours, but they can come in, take a shower, get a night's sleep, get connected with an advocate to kind of make a plan forward. And so lots going on, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. We get to engage with people and really see them. I was at the drop-in center last week, and a young man came in that we'd walked with for quite a while, from being exploited and homeless to safe shelter to support. He got into a welding program. And then that day that I saw him there, they were taking him out to lunch to celebrate his 3 weeks on the job and in his own apartment. So, those kind of stories keep you encouraged.
And that makes sense. When you think about it, when you're able to change someone's life who's gone through something so traumatic, you actually change the course of even what they're going to start doing going forward, and when they're building and families and things of that nature. That's powerful. It
Yeah.
really is. I know you're also a faith-based organization as well.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
What are some misconceptions possibly around human trafficking that maybe people don't fully understand that you see differently, obviously?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, number one is most of the people, because the movies think that victims are kidnapped.
Okay.
And they're very, very few are actually kidnapped. Like I said, it's usually through a relationship. Unfortunately, we have parents that sell their children for drugs, for rent money, familial trafficking, a neighbor, someone they know, unfortunately, is more of what it is, or an online predator. So I think the kidnapping is a misconception. Another misconception is, well, if they're not chained in a basement, which most of them are not, and they go to the gas station, they're at the hotel and the pimp's not there, why don't they just leave? And you just cannot underestimate the power of that brainwashing and trauma bond that happens with someone in trauma. They really get bonded to their trafficker. He mixes love and affection with beatings and brutality. And the brain's way of surviving is to get connected in a very deep way with that perpetrator. And so that is a very difficult thing to break away from. And also they threaten their family members. We had a gal who was trafficked to 12 to 18. And she said they threatened to get my 2 little sisters. So I felt like I just had to do what I needed to do to protect them. And so they know how to manipulate these individuals. And so to say, why don't you just run away, or you were in a position where you could have left, mentally they are not in a position where they feel like they can leave. And I think that the public needs to really be aware of that.
Well, especially with the age group that you mentioned, they're still young,
Yeah.
and so they're in the hands of adults who are doing these things to them, like just a mixture of like you mentioned, the love and also the pain of it too. But they're kids, at
Right.
the end of the day. Wow. So do you find that is more prevalent for young girls than it is boys? Because I've been learning more that young boys are actually getting trafficked just as much as young girls. Is that what you see?
Yes, unfortunately, we've not, as a whole industry, anti-trafficking organizations, we have not identified and recovered as many males. And there's studies out now that men who were sexually assaulted and abused as children do not usually make an outcry for 2 decades. 2 decades. So men are
Mhm.
much less making an outcry. Now there's a dear man. He's actually a judge,
Mhm.
survivor of human trafficking as a child. And
Wow.
he said, I am convinced that if a teacher or a counselor or one of my friend's parents would have said, hey, you look sad. If you ever want to talk, I want you to know
Mhm.
I'm here for you. He said, I am convinced I would have made an outcry, but I never did.
Mm.
So I think we're just not identifying them. We're not making it safe enough for them to. We're trying to
Mhm.
change imagery around human trafficking. Most of the time, you'll see female victims portrayed, and
Right.
there's a lot of conversations about trying to bridge that gap. But in our own organization, we see many, many more young females.
Yeah, and the reason I brought that up because at our church, someone came and spoke a little bit about this, and when they said that young boys are equally affected, but there's a stigma around all of that, and so
Yeah,
that's why they don't say as much about it. So I was wondering what you all
yeah.
saw. So in the work that you do, how can someone get involved and support the work that you're doing?
Well, I would say number one, pray for us. We need wisdom, we need protection, we need provision for the work that we do, and that's
Mhm.
always invited. I think second of all, just educate yourself. You can go on our website, unboundnow.org. But growing and learning and reading books and understanding the issue makes us as a community more able to identify those victims around us. And I mean, hardly a week goes by that I don't get a phone call from someone that I work with, someone that goes to my church saying, hey, my cousin, my niece needs help. This
Yeah.
unfortunately is so prevalent that so many people in our lives may be caught in this. And so the more we're educated on this, we know what the resources
Mhm.
are available in our communities, we can understand it so you can help break
Yeah.
off that shame for someone and be that comfort. I think that's really important. Host an event for people to learn about it.
Mm.
That's something that's really important to be a protected volunteering and things that strengthen young people back, some the boys club, girls club, YMCA's, church Sunday school, kids camps. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure your audience can remember one adult, something powerful that someone said
Mhm.
to them when they were a young person that can be a trajectory changer. And
Yes.
so my husband works in children's church at our church and has for many years. I'm like, now these kids are growing up and they'll stop us in a restaurant and go, I remember when you said this.
Yeah.
I was facing this
Mhm.
situation and I remembered this, so
Mhm.
volunteering in those spaces are super, super powerful. And of course, we are supported by donations. And I never knew how much money it was going to take to have these people on the front line. So anyway, or if
Yeah.
someone would want to have a fundraiser or support us monthly financially is always a tremendous blessing to keep us on the front lines.
Oh, I love that. So I'm going to ask you in closing, what would you like to share as a closing statement about the work that you do, or anything that we can do to support, or what have you? I know you mentioned the different ways that we can serve, but any closing thoughts around this?
I was actually speaking at an event in my city a couple of weeks ago, and it was a huge audience. And several people came up to me and said, I came to this meeting because I wanted to hear. I knew that you were coming. I wanted to hear. And I got so emotional when I was
Yeah.
speaking because they cared. And so even for you to have us on your magazine, to ask me to come speak, I mean, it really, I cannot tell you how much it matters because it's hard work. Our teams are out there laying it down. They're dealing with traumatized people. They're in the house, they're in the hospital with, traumatized, victimized people. I mean, I've got all kinds of phone calls calling that are just brutal situations our people are stepping in. And when people like yourself or the audience say, I heard you, or I want to hear you, or I want to support you, I want you to talk to my group about this. I want to host you on a podcast so that more people can hear and support. It just really puts wind in our sails that we're not out there alone, that our community really is behind us, and it means a lot.
No, anyone can tell you I love the support, period. And especially, I'm grateful that Alice introduced us because I know, although I've never been through human trafficking, my son about a few months ago, he's all but, I don't know, 5'8" tall, and he was walking home and he had a car that tried to take him.
Oh,
And I mean,
goodness.
he ran the opposite direction, yelled, screamed, and had a neighbor who was like, come over here. And we don't know who the person, we didn't know the neighbor. It was just a nice lady who was just like, she saw him in trouble. And it made me think, I'm not sure if it would have been a human trafficking situation because he didn't fit what I thought was the parameters, young, female, this, that, and the other. And the more I started learning about it, it was like the age group is changing, even the profiles are changing. And I was thinking just, in that moment, it makes you look into something a little bit differently, just how close that could have been if he didn't think quickly. And I always say that was nothing but God, nothing but, because he had headphones on and he was walking home and he said something, but we know the Holy Spirit told him, turn around, and he saw that the car was coming. It just made me think about that when maybe about 2 weeks later is when Alice texted me about your information. And I was like, okay, it's good for people to know about it, even if it doesn't in your day to day. You just never know how close it can hit home.
Yeah, and that information is powerful because I mean, it's what would we say? We'd say don't have the headphones on when you're walking. That makes you vulnerable because you can't hear people coming. Be aware of your surroundings and be leery of the van that's parked next to you in a parking lot. You hate to put so much fear in people, but knowledge is powerful. And so I'm sorry that happened, but so thankful that he's okay.
Same here. And like what Shannon said, information, she said, is key. It really is. We need to be informed, and our goal is to share your information as much as we can and support you. And we'll put all your contact information as well at the website and how people can get involved. But I appreciate your time so much and for sharing, and more importantly, the work that you're doing, Susan.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.